The grand mahogany doors of Riverside High's reunion hall swung open with a groan that silenced 200 conversations. Haley Parker stood in the doorway, no longer the trembling girl they'd destroyed. Beside her, a massive gray wolf surveyed the room with one amber eye the other, clouded and blind, bore witness to shared suffering. Madison Sinclair Brooks's champagne flute shattered against marble, golden liquid spreading like blood. Tyler Brooks stumbled backward into the anniversary banner, tearing it down. The Facebook live stream Madison had started, "Watch Us Prank the School Loser," now broadcast their terror to 50,000 viewers. Haley's weathered hand rested on Rook's scarred shoulder. She wore her dead mother's dress, the same one they'd torn to shreds a decade ago, now meticulously restored. The wolf's lips pulled back, not in a snarl, but something far more unsettling, a smile. "Hello, classmates." Haley's voice cut through the paralysis. "I believe you invited me. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Riverside, Montana was the kind of town where secrets festered beneath pristine lawns and Sunday church services. Population 15,000, where everyone knew your name, your business, and exactly how far you'd fallen from grace. The Riverside High School class of 2014 had been particularly vicious, even by small-town standards, and tonight they'd gathered to relive their glory days. Haley Parker, now 28, had transformed from the skeletal girl who'd lived in a rusted Ford Explorer into something the town couldn't categorize. The National Forest Service wildlife tracker stood tall despite her slight frame. Her mother Emma's Romanian features now sharpened by years of mountain survival. Emma had died holding her daughter's hand in that same car. 3 janitor jobs having destroyed her body but never her dignity. Cancer took her at 41, leaving 17-year-old Haley with nothing but sketches of wolves and the smell of industrial bleach in her clothes. Madison Sinclair Brooks ruled the reunion committee as she'd once ruled the school hallways. Mayor's daughter turned failed real estate agent. She'd married Tyler Brooks for his football legacy only to watch him gamble it away. Their daughter Lily, 5 years old with her father's eyes and her mother's ruthless smile, played near the dessert table, innocent of her parents' crumbling empire. Madison's father, Mayor Robert Sinclair, was dying of pancreatic cancer in Riverside General, though Madison didn't know he'd been watching Haley for a decade, funding her life from the shadows. Tyler Brooks had peaked at 18, his quarterback hands now shaking from withdrawal as he nursed his 3rd whiskey. The construction company had fired him last month. The casino had his house deed. Madison didn't know about the second mortgage, or that he'd already decided tonight would change everything one way or another. Sarah Chen worked the night shift at Riverside Emergency, had requested this evening off specifically. Haley's childhood best friend until the day she'd chosen popularity over loyalty. She'd spent 10 years suturing other people's wounds while her own festered. She sat in her car outside, gathering courage to enter. Marcus Thompson, the reunion coordinator with the eager smile, had tracked Haley to her cabin 60 miles north. He knew about the $2 million inheritance from an anonymous benefactor. Madison had promised him a finder's fee. What he didn't know was that wolves remember the scent of cruelty, and Rook had been watching him since he'd entered the hall. The invitation had arrived on September 15th, delivered by a nervous FedEx driver who'd needed 3 attempts to approach the cabin. Rook's presence on the porch had that effect on people. The cream-colored envelope bore the Riverside High crest in gold embossing, the same pretentious design that had adorned rejection letters for every scholarship Haley had desperately applied for. Inside, calligraphy announced the 10-year reunion with suspicious enthusiasm. "Your presence is specifically requested. The class isn't complete without you." 3 weeks earlier, in Madison's renovated kitchen that would soon be foreclosed, the plan had taken shape. The Facebook group RHS 2014 Legends buzzed with activity hidden from public view. Madison had discovered Haley's inheritance through her father's lawyer's secretary, $2 million from an anonymous benefactor, sitting in trust for the past 3 years. Tyler needed $300,000 to avoid prosecution for embezzlement he swore was a misunderstanding. Madison needed to save face before the bank notices became public. Together, They needed Haley Parker to be the same pathetic girl they'd broken. "She's living like some mountain hermit with wolves," Marcus Thompson had reported, accepting $5,000 Madison had borrowed from her dying father's emergency fund. Completely alone. No social media. No connections. She'll be desperate for acceptance. Marcus had spent 2 weeks tracking Haley through her National Forest Service work, learning her routines, photographing her from a distance. He'd assured them she was still the same weird girl, just with better hygiene. The Facebook group's private messages revealed the extent of their planning. "Remember when we made her eat lunch in the bathroom for a month?" typed Ashley Coleman. "Brett's bringing the old yearbook with all the defaced photos," added Jennifer Walsh. "Tyler, you still have that video from senior year?" Madison had asked, meaning the one where they'd cornered Haley after her mother's funeral, torn her mother's dress, and poured red paint over her while she sobbed. "Insurance policy." Tyler had responded with a thumbs-up emoji. Sarah Chen had been added to the group by accident, someone confusing her with Sarah Chapman. She'd watched the messages accumulate, each one a fresh reminder of her cowardice. She'd been eating lunch with Haley the day she'd chosen Madison's table instead, publicly announcing, "I don't know her." While Haley sat alone with her cold sandwich from the food bank, Sarah had become an ER nurse to save lives, but she'd never forgiven herself for the one she'd helped destroy. Haley had read the invitation 3 times before laughing a sound that made Rook's ears prick with concern. She knew it was a trap. The elaborate language, the personal delivery, the handwritten note from Madison saying, "Let's put the past behind us." The girl who'd orchestrated her hell wouldn't suddenly develop a conscience. But Haley had learned something in 10 years of tracking predators. Sometimes you had to enter the trap to spring it. October 1st found her at the cedar chest she'd never opened, her mother's things preserved in lavender and tissue paper. Emma Parker's single good dress lay folded at the bottom, a deep blue Romanian folk dress her mother had worn to every parent-teacher conference, every school play. Every moment she'd tried to give her daughter dignity despite their circumstances. The dress they'd destroyed while Haley had begged them to stop. Please. It was all she had left of her mother. Now, restored by an elderly seamstress in Whitefish, who'd asked no questions about the paint stains and tears, it waited. Haley groomed Rook with the same patience he'd shown her when she'd been too weak to stand. His gray coat, thick for the coming winter, shed in clouds as she worked. The blind eye, courtesy of a bear trap, had healed into a milky calm. The missing toes on his right hind leg, same incident, barely affected his gait anymore. "We're going back," she told him in the low voice that meant serious business, "to show them what they created." The drive from her cabin to Riverside took 2 hours through mountain passes already dusted with early snow. Rook sat in the passenger seat of her Forest Service truck, his massive head out the window, scenting the air that gradually transformed from pine and freedom to exhaust and confinement. Haley's hands tightened on the wheel as they passed the rest stop where she'd last seen her mother alive, past the valley where she'd planned to jump, past the wilderness boundary where she'd found Rook and decided maybe 2 broken creatures could make one whole one. The Riverside city limits sign. "Welcome to Big Sky Country," mocked her as they entered. Nothing had changed. Nothing ever changed in towns like this except the people who escaped them. The reunion hall erupted into chaos the moment Haley crossed the threshold. Phones appeared like weapons, cameras clicking, recording, streaming. Madison's carefully orchestrated plan began unraveling immediately. She'd prepared a slideshow, Haley Parker Then and Now, meant to display yearbook photos, the homeless girl eating from dumpsters, the viral video of her humiliation. But the remote trembled in her manicured hands as Rook's presence transformed the atmosphere from predatory to prey. "Security!" someone shouted. But Jake Morrison, the volunteer security guard who'd peeked his hall monitor, backed against the wall when Rook's amber eye fixed on him. The wolf didn't growl, didn't bare teeth. He simply existed with such primal authority that 200 adults remembered they were just soft flesh and brittle bone. "He's trained," Haley said calmly, her hand never leaving Rook's shoulder. "More trained than any of us ever were." She walked deeper into the hall. her mother's blue dress catching the light. Each embroidered flower a testament to resurrection. The crowd parted like biblical waters, some stumbling over chairs, others pressing against walls. Madison's laptop crashed to the floor, the slideshow dying in a cascade of broken pixels. Tyler stood frozen by the bar, his whiskey forgotten. He'd practiced his lines for weeks, the casual greeting, the calculated surprise, the gradual manipulation toward money. But seeing Haley now, composed where she'd once cowered, accompanied by a creature that looked ready to tear throats, he understood with crystalline clarity what they'd all become: parasites. They'd peaked at 18 and spent 10 years decomposing. "Madison," Haley's voice carried across the silent hall. "You look well." It wasn't sarcasm. It was worse, genuine indifference. Madison's face flushed beneath her contoured makeup. The plan required Haley to be desperate, pathetic, grateful for inclusion. This woman with quiet authority and a wolf's loyalty had no place in their script. "We're so glad you came," Madison managed, her voice pitched too high. "We've all been wondering what became of you." The lie hung between them like a corpse. They'd wondered nothing. They'd assumed she was dead, institutionalized, or selling herself for survival. The reality that she'd become something extraordinary threatened the very foundation of their worldview. Marcus Thompson stepped forward, smartphone raised. "This is incredible, Haley Parker. Everyone and her dog." Rook's head turned toward Marcus with mechanical precision. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus had been upwind at the cabin, photographing from what he'd thought was a safe distance. But wolves remember. Rook's lips pulled back just enough to reveal canines designed for crushing bone. "He's not a dog," Haley said. "He's family. The only family that chose me instead of abandoning me." The words landed like slaps. Several classmates looked away, remembering moments they'd participated in or witnessed without intervention. That's when Sarah Chen entered, still wearing her hospital scrubs beneath a coat. The room's attention split between the wolf and the woman who'd been Haley's best friend until the day she wasn't. Sarah's face was ravaged by sleeplessness. Her normally perfect composure shattered. "Haley," she said, and her voice broke on the name. "Sarah." Acknowledgement. Nothing more. Sarah walked toward them, ignoring the wolf, ignoring the cameras, ignoring everything except the guilt she'd carried like cancer. When she was 10 feet away, she dropped to her knees on the marble floor. The crack of bone on stone echoed. "I'm sorry," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm sorry for choosing them. I'm sorry for abandoning you when your mother died. I'm sorry for being a coward. I'm sorry for every single day of the last 10 years. The hall held its breath. Public confession wasn't in the Riverside playbook. You buried shame beneath achievement and alcohol. You didn't kneel in designer scrubs and admit failure. Haley studied Sarah's bowed head, processing this unexpected variable. Before she could respond, Rook's behavior changed. The wolf's body went rigid, his nose lifted, testing air currents none of them could perceive. A low whine emerged from his throat, not aggression, but alarm. Haley's hand tightened on his fur. She'd seen this before, right before flash floods, forest fires, the disasters that civilization ignored until too late. "Something's wrong," Haley said, but her words were drowned by Madison's laptop suddenly sparking where it lay shattered. The spark caught the tablecloth, and flame bloomed like a poisonous flower. But that was just coincidence. The real fire had already been burning for 3 minutes in the kitchen where Tyler had disabled the smoke detectors and soaked cleaning rags in accelerant, planning to be a hero who saved everyone, especially his wife, especially in front of cameras that would restore his reputation. He'd set the timer for 20 minutes, enough time to establish alibi, to position himself strategically. But old buildings don't follow schedules. The Victorian-era wood, painted and repainted with decades of lead and chemicals, caught faster than modern materials would. The kitchen connected to the main hall through a service corridor lined with 100-year-old timber. By the time Madison's laptop sparked, The real fire had already consumed the kitchen and was racing through the bones of the building like vengeance. The smoke arrived first, seeping through ventilation grates like reaching fingers. Then came the sound, not the dramatic roar of movie fires, but the whisper crack of history being erased. The fire alarm, ancient and unmaintained, managed 3 diseased bleats before dying. The sprinkler system, installed in 1987 and never properly serviced, coughed rust-colored water for 10 seconds before failing entirely. Fire! The scream came from Jennifer Walsh, who'd opened the service door to find a wall of flame. Pandemonium erupted. 200 people rushed for the main entrance, crushing against each other, climbing over chairs, reverting to the same savage hierarchy they'd practiced in high school. The weak were trampled, the strong shoved forward. Madison screamed for Tyler, who stood paralyzed by the bar, watching his controlled burn become a holocaust. That's when Lily Brooks, 5 years old and forgotten in the chaos, wandered toward the pretty orange light coming from the kitchen corridor. Lily! Madison's scream cut through everything. She fought against the crowd, but the human current was too strong, pushing her toward the exit as her daughter walked toward death. Tyler didn't move, couldn't move, paralyzed by the realization that he'd murdered his own child. Rook was already moving. The wolf plunged into the crowd, not fighting but flowing between bodies like smoke itself. Haley followed, her hand on his back, trusting his senses over her own. The main entrance had become a death trap. Bodies wedged in the doorframe, people climbing over each other. But Rook turned away, heading deeper into the building. "This way!" Haley shouted, but few heard and fewer listened. Only Sarah, still on her knees, saw them disappear into the smoke and made the choice that would define her redemption. She stood and followed the wolf. The building groaned around them, a century of construction beginning its rapid deconstruction. Somewhere in the smoke, a child cried, somewhere behind them. Madison screamed her daughter's name, and somewhere in the darkness, leading them through air that had become poison, a half-blind wolf navigated by senses humans had forgotten they'd ever possessed, heading not for safety, but toward the crying child, because that's what family does, choose each other, even unto death. Part A, The Past Unveiled. The smoke filling the reunion hall carried Haley back to another suffocating moment, January 17th. 2014, in the parking lot of Riverside General Hospital. Emma Parker had died at 3:47 in the morning, her hand going slack in her daughter's grip as machines screamed their electronic grief. The cancer had eaten everything except her accent, and her last words had been in Romanian. "Nu plunge pentru mine, draga mea, plunge pentru ei." Don't cry for me, my dear. Cry for them. Haley had walked out of the hospital into a blizzard, her mother's body still warm on the gurney behind her. She'd climbed into their Ford Explorer, their home, for 3 years, and waited. The hospital needed the bed. Someone would come, eventually, to move the body of the janitor who'd cleaned their halls while dying inside. But for 14 hours, Haley sat in that parking lot, engine off to save gas she couldn't afford, wrapped in the sleeping bag that smelled like her mother's lavender soap and industrial bleach. She'd returned to the hospital 3 times, walking through the automatic doors to sit beside the body that social services hadn't yet claimed. Each time, she'd held Emma's hand, memorizing the calluses from scrub brushes, the wedding ring worn thin as hope, the scar on her thumb from teaching Haley to cook on a camping stove. The security guard, Raymond, had pretended not to see her. He'd known Emma, had shared cigarettes with her during her breaks between mopping floors and emptying trash. He'd let Haley have those 14 hours because sometimes that's all the kindness the world can manage looking away. School had been mandatory. The counselor, Mrs. Peterson, had threatened foster care if Haley missed another day. So 3 days after burying her mother in a pauper's grave, the headstone reading simply Emma Parker, 1973-2014, Haley had returned to Riverside High wearing her mother's dress, the blue one with Romanian embroidery, the only beautiful thing they'd owned. Madison had been waiting. The mayor's daughter understood power the way sharks understand blood, instinctively, completely. She'd orchestrated everything with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony of cruelty. The Facebook event, Haley Parker Appreciation Day. the invitation list, everyone except Haley. The plan document, the destruction of the last thing connecting the orphan to her dead mother. It had happened in the gymnasium after school. Tyler had been the one to grab her first, his quarterback hands that would later touch Madison with tenderness holding Haley's arms behind her back. "Sorry," he'd whispered, breath hot with vodka stolen from his father's cabinet. "But you understand, right? It's just how things are." Sarah had stood by the door, assigned as lookout, her face a mask of misery that didn't stop her from doing her job. When Haley had screamed her name, "Sarah, please," she'd simply closed her eyes and turned away. Later, Sarah would claim she hadn't known how far it would go. But she'd known enough. They all had. Madison had used her mother's sewing scissors, the expensive German ones that cut through fabric like water. Haley's long brown hair, the hair Emma had brushed every night in the car, humming Romanian lullabies, fell to the gymnasium floor in chunks. "You look better," Madison had declared, stepping back to admire her work. "More honest, like the nothing you are." The paint had been Tyler's contribution. Red barn paint his father used for fence posts, thick and oil-based, impossible to wash out. He'd poured it over her shorn head while Madison filmed, while 30 classmates laughed, while Haley sobbed not for her dignity but for her mother's dress, watching the blue fabric disappear beneath red that looked like blood. "Say it," Madison had commanded, phone steady as a weapon. "Say what you are. Please. Say it or we'll strip you naked and leave you here." Haley had said it. "I'm nothing. I'm nobody. I don't belong here." The video had gone viral within hours. Riverside High justice loser gets what she deserves. 40,000 views by midnight. Comments celebrating, encouraging, suggesting worse things they could have done. Haley had watched it once from the library computer, then walked into the mountains with her mother's sleeping pills. All of them, rattling in the bottle like promises. She'd made it 16 miles into the wilderness, following deer trails into elevations where snow never fully melted. The cliff had been perfect, a 100-foot drop onto granite that would leave no room for survival or second thoughts. She'd stood at the edge as the sun set, pills in one hand, her mother's ruined dress still stinking of paint, and prepared to step into the nothing they'd said she was. The wolf's whimper had stopped her, 50 feet below, caught in a bear trap probably set illegally by poachers. A young gray wolf lay dying. The trap had closed on his right hind leg, shattering bone, tearing muscle. He'd been there for days, maybe a week. His left eye had been destroyed, probably by his own thrashing. Ravens waited in nearby trees, patient as undertakers. Haley had looked at the wolf. The wolf had looked at her with his one good eye, and something passed between them. Recognition of endings, perhaps. Or the strange clarity that comes when death stops being frightening and becomes simply the next logical step. She'd climbed down. Not to save the wolf, she had no illusions about her ability to save anything, but because dying alone seemed like the cruelest thing in a world built on cruelty. The pills scattered forgotten among the rocks. She'd approached slowly, expecting teeth, deserving them. Instead, the wolf had whined again. A sound so similar to her own keening grief that she'd collapsed beside him and cried until she had no water left in her body. The trap had been a puzzle of rust and malice, but Haley had always been good with her hands. All those hours helping her mother fix the Explorer had taught her about springs and pressure. It had taken 3 hours in darkness, her fingers torn and bleeding, but she'd freed him. The wolf had dragged himself 6 feet away and collapsed. She'd collapsed beside him, both waiting to die, neither quite managing it. Part B. The Rescue. The fire in the reunion hall didn't follow Tyler's plan because fires, like wolves, answer to older laws than human intention. The accelerant he'd used, industrial degreaser from his failed construction business, had pooled in the basement, creating a river of flame that followed 100-year-old floor joists like a roadmap to destruction. Within 4 minutes of the first spark, the temperature in the kitchen had reached 1,800 degrees. The service corridor had become a horizontal chimney, drawing flame toward the main hall with the physics of inevitable disaster. Madison's hysteria had transformed her from queen bee to wounded animal, clawing at anyone blocking her path back to the fire. My baby, Lily. Her designer dress tore as she fought, her voice shredding itself raw, but the crowd had become a singular organism focused on survival, carrying her toward the exit despite her resistance. Tyler remained frozen by the bar, his mind calculating impossible mathematics. How many minutes since he'd lit the match? How many before the ceiling collapsed? How many ways a father could fail? Haley didn't hesitate. The decision came from the same place that had made her climb down to a dying wolf, the strange clarity that arrives when you've already survived your own death. She plunged after Rook into the smoke, following his shape more by faith than sight. Sarah stayed close behind, her medical training overriding her fear, already triaging in her mind smoke inhalation, burn degrees, crush injuries from the stampede. The building's Victorian bones were becoming visible as modern additions burned away. Wallpaper from 1924 curled like dying flowers. Lead paint released its poison in rainbow smoke. The gift shop, a recent addition where the reunion committee had planned to sell yearbooks and memories, had already partially collapsed, its modern drywall construction no match for ancient fire. Rook found Lily by scent, not sight. The child had crawled under a display table, curled into a ball as smoke filled her lungs, her small body's survival instinct choosing stillness when movement might have saved her. The wolf's bark sharp, commanding cut through the fire's roar. He grabbed the girl's dress in his teeth, gentle despite urgency, and began dragging her toward Haley. But the ceiling chose that moment to surrender. A beam, installed in 1889 when Montana was still territory, crashed down in a shower of embers and 100-year-old dreams. It caught Tyler across the shoulders, driving him to his knees, pinning him beneath weight that had once held up dances and graduations and all the ordinary cruelties of small-town education. Haley faced a choice that wasn't a choice at all. She passed Lily to Sarah, "Get her out," and turned back toward Tyler, the man who'd held her down, who'd poured paint over her mother's dress, who'd whispered sorry like it meant something. He was screaming now, the fire eating at his legs, his face a mask of the terror he'd once inspired in others. She grabbed the beam, her hands immediately blistering, the wood so hot it had begun to char. Rook appeared beside her, his powerful jaws closing on Tyler's collar, pulling as Haley lifted. Together, girl and wolf, predator and prey, they moved the beam enough for Tyler to crawl free, his legs ruined but still attached, his life saved by those he'd tried to destroy. The main entrance had become impassable, bodies wedged in the doorframe, the stampede creating its own architecture of disaster. But Rook knew the building's secrets the way he knew forest trails. He'd been exploring while Haley had faced her tormentors, mapping escape routes with the paranoia of the perpetually hunted. He led them toward the old coal chute, abandoned since the building converted to gas heat in 1962, its metal door hidden behind stacked chairs nobody had moved in decades. Sarah had already cleared the path by the time Haley arrived dragging Tyler. Her scrubs were black with soot, her face streaked with tears that cut channels through ash, but her hands were steady as she checked Lily's pulse, cleared her airway, began rescue breathing with the automatic competence of someone who'd seen enough death to recognize its approach. The coal chute was a mouth of darkness barely wide enough for bodies. Rook went first, his claws scraping metal, testing the integrity of a passage that hadn't been used since Kennedy was president. Then Lily, passed down like fragile cargo. Then Tyler, semi-conscious and moaning. Then Sarah. Haley went last, the building collapsing behind her in a symphony of destruction that would make tomorrow's headlines. They emerged into chaos. Fire trucks arriving, sirens screaming, Madison being restrained by 3 firefighters as she tried to run back into the inferno. The moment she saw Lily covered in soot but breathing, cradled in Sarah's arms, she collapsed completely, crawling across asphalt that tore her stockings, her designer facade finally completely shattered. "My baby, my baby, my baby," she repeated, gathering Lily against her chest, her tears leaving clean tracks through ash. She looked up at Haley, at the wolf standing guard beside her, and for the first time in her life, Madison Sinclair Brooks had nothing to say. No cruelty, no cleverness, no power. Just a mother holding her child. Alive because the girl she'd tortured had chosen salvation over justice. The cameras arrived before the ambulance's modern journalism's priority system. Channel 7 News got the image that would define the story: Haley Parker, her mother's dress charred but intact, standing beside a gray wolf whose fur was singed, whose blind eye wept ash, whose very existence challenged every assumption about what was possible. Behind them, the reunion hall collapsed in a final exhale of spark and memory. "Who are you?" the reporter shouted over the sirens. Haley's hand rested on Rook's head, feeling his heart beat through her palm, remembering another night when they'd saved each other. "Nobody special," she said. "Just someone who knows what it's like to burn." The cameras caught it all: the reunion of predator and prey, the salvation of the guilty by the innocent, the wolf who'd led humans to safety when their own kind had led them to disaster. Within an hour, the footage had gone viral, not with cruelty, but with wonder. The comment sections filled with disbelief, with recognition, with the strange hunger humans have for proof that redemption exists, that the abandoned can return, that sometimes the losers become the only winners who matter. But Haley wasn't watching the coverage. She was kneeling beside Rook in the parking lot, checking his paws for burns, whispering in the low voice that meant everything was going to be okay, even when it wasn't, even when it couldn't be. The wolf's tongue found her tears, tasting salt and smoke and the strange freedom that comes from facing your demons and discovering they're just damaged children who never learned to stop breaking things. The veterinary emergency unit at Riverside General had never seen anything like it. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, who'd spent 30 years treating everything from ranch horses to house cats, stood frozen as Haley carried Rook through the automatic doors. The wolf's fur was charred black along his right side, the pads of his feet split and weeping blood, his breathing labored with smoke damage that would have killed a smaller animal. Behind them, Sarah supported Tyler on a gurney while Madison clutched Lily, refusing to let the pediatric nurses take her daughter even for examination. "That's a wolf," Dr. Hernandez said unnecessarily, her hands already moving to prepare treatment despite her shock. "That's an actual timber wolf." "He's my partner," Haley said simply, laying Rook on the steel examination table with the tenderness of placing an infant in a crib. Federal Wildlife Service registration number MW2847. All his paperwork is current. She pulled laminated documents from her pocket, somehow intact despite the fire, proving what shouldn't need proving, that sometimes love requires official permission. The burns were extensive. 3rd degree along his hindquarters where burning debris had fallen. 2nd degree on his paws from the superheated floor. 1st degree covering 40% of his body. His left eye, already blind from the old trap injury, was now swollen shut from smoke irritation. Dr. Hernandez worked with the efficiency of someone who'd learned that questions could wait, but treatment couldn't. Inserting IV lines, administering morphine calculated for his 110-pound frame, debriding tissue that had already begun to die. In the human ER, Tyler was confessing to anyone who would listen. The morphine had loosened more than his pain, unleashing a torrent of guilt that the nurses tried unsuccessfully to stop. "I said it," he kept saying, his voice carrying through the thin walls. "I set the fire. I wanted to be a hero. I wanted Madison to look at me like she used to. I wanted to matter again." The police officer taking his statement had to keep asking him to slow down, to clarify. But Tyler couldn't stop the words that had been burning inside him longer than any flame. Madison heard every word from the pediatric ward where she sat holding Lily, who'd been cleared of serious injury but kept for observation. Her face cycled through expressions: disbelief, rage, devastation before settling into something hollow. She'd married Tyler for his glory, stayed with him for appearances, planned to use him for one last con. She hadn't known he was capable of this magnitude of failure. She hadn't known she was capable of caring. The news crews had transformed the hospital parking lot into a broadcast center. Channel 7 had been joined by national affiliates, their satellites reaching toward the sky like prayers for sensational footage. The story was perfect, too perfect to be true, except that hundreds of witnesses and dozens of phone videos confirmed every detail. Wolf Saves Bullies Who Tormented Owner had already trended to #1 globally, the algorithm gods blessing the narrative with their mysterious favor. Inside, Haley hadn't left Rook's side. She sang to him in Romanian, the lullabies her mother had hummed while cleaning office buildings, while dying of cancer, while holding her daughter in a car that was their only home. Dormi, dormi, lupul meu. Sleep, sleep, my wolf. Her voice was raw from smoke, cracking on the high notes, but Rook's ear twitched at the familiar sounds, proof that somewhere beneath the morphine and trauma, he was still listening. Sarah appeared in the doorway of the veterinary unit, still wearing her ruined scrubs. She'd refused treatment for her own burns, the minor ones on her hands from clearing debris. "How is he alive?" Haley said, without looking up from Rook. "That's all we've ever asked for." Sarah stepped closer, her medical training automatically assessing the wolf's condition. The burns were survivable but would scar extensively. The smoke inhalation was concerning but manageable. The real danger was infection burn victims, human or animal, often died from sepsis days after surviving the initial trauma. "The grafts," she said suddenly. "He needs skin grafts." Dr. Hernandez looked up from adjusting Rook's IV. "We can use cadaver grafts from dogs, but the rejection risk, use mine." Sarah's voice was steady as her hands when she saved lives. "I'm O negative, universal donor. The xenograft won't take permanently, but it'll buy time for his own skin to regenerate." She was already rolling up her sleeve, revealing unmarked skin that had never known real pain. "I've got plenty to spare." The veterinarian stared at her. "That's not... I can't perform human-to-animal grafting. The ethics board would... Then I'll do it myself." Sarah moved to the supply cabinet with the authority of someone who belonged there. "I've done hundreds of grafts. The technique is identical, unless someone here plans to stop me." Nobody moved. The security guard who'd been posted after reporters tried to sneak in looked deliberately away, remembering perhaps his own dogs, his own debts. That's when Mayor Robert Sinclair arrived. He entered through the loading dock, avoiding the media circus, pushed in a wheelchair by his hospice nurse. The pancreatic cancer had eaten him down to essence skin over skeleton, will over flesh. His breathing was labored even with the oxygen tank. Each inhale a conscious decision to continue. He'd checked himself out of palliative care against medical advice, driven by something more urgent than dying. "Where is she?" he asked the first nurse he encountered. Everyone knew which she he meant. The story had reached him through the television in his hospice room, watching his daughter's humiliation broadcast globally, watching the girl he'd secretly protected save the family he'd openly failed. He found Haley in the veterinary unit, her hand on Rook's chest, feeling each heartbeat as if she could will them to continue through touch alone. Sarah was preparing the graft procedure, marking donor sites on her own thighs with surgical precision. They both looked up as the wheelchair's wheels squeaked on linoleum. "Mr. Mayor," Haley said, recognition without surprise. She'd seen him watching her over the years at her mother's funeral, at her high school graduation that she'd attended alone, at the ceremony where she'd received her wildlife service certification, always at a distance, always looking like he wanted to speak but couldn't find words. "Miss Parker." His voice was autumn leaves, dry and breaking. "I need to tell you something. Before the morphine takes my mind completely. Before I run out of chances, to be honest." He gestured weakly to his nurse, who understood and withdrew, closing the door behind her. "Your mother saved my life once," he began, each word carefully chosen from his diminishing supply. 23 years ago, I was driving drunk the mayor before I was mayor, just another entitled ass who thought consequences were for other people. Hit a tree off Highway 12. Your mother was walking home from her night shift. 3 in the morning, snow falling. She pulled me from the car before it exploded. Never told anyone. Never asked for anything. Just an immigrant woman saving a stranger because that's what decent people do. Haley's hand stilled on Rook's fur, processing this revelation that recontextualized everything. I've been trying to pay that debt ever since, Mayor Sinclair continued. The anonymous donations, the cabin deed, the scholarship that got you through your certification program, all of it blood money for my cowardice. I watched Madison destroy you and did nothing because I was too weak to confront my own failure as a father. I let my daughter become a monster while trying to secretly support her victim, as if checks could balance cruelty. Why now? Haley asked, her voice neutral as mountain air. Why confess now? Because I'm dying badly, he said simply. And you deserve to know that someone saw. Someone witnessed what they did to you and should have stopped it. I'm not asking for forgiveness that's not yours to give. I'm just trying to die with one less lie. He reached into his jacket with trembling fingers, pulling out an envelope that smelled like medicine and regret. My will. Madison gets nothing unless she makes things right. Really right, not performance right. The house, the money, all of it goes to your camp if she fails. Let her earn redemption the way you earned survival. Before Haley could respond, the door burst open. Madison stood there, having fled the pediatric ward when she heard her father was in the building. Her makeup had run into a Rorschach test of grief. Her designer dress replaced with a hospital gown because her clothes had been taken as evidence. She looked between her dying father and the woman she'd tortured, understanding spreading across her face like dawn. You, she said to her father, the word containing 28 years of complicated history. Then, to Haley, he's why you survived. He's why you could come back. The rage that had defined Madison Sinclair was dissolving into something more complex: betrayal, understanding, and the terrible recognition that she'd been competing against a ghost's debt this entire time. No, Haley said firmly. I survived because of this. Her hand touched Rook's head, feeling the fever building despite the IV antibiotics. Because on the worst night of my life, I found someone else who was dying and decided we could die together or live together. But we couldn't die alone. Your father's money helped. But money doesn't teach you how to trust a wolf or how to let a wolf trust you. That takes something money can't buy. Madison took 3 steps forward, then shocked everyone by dropping to her knees beside her father's wheelchair. Not dramatically, not performed, but with the exhaustion of someone who'd run out of facades. I almost lost her, she whispered, meaning Lily. I almost lost her because Tyler wanted to impress me. Because I made him think he had to be impressive to matter. Because you made me think I had to be perfect to matter. Because this whole fucking town makes everyone think they have to be someone else to matter. Language, the mayor said automatically, then laughed a sound like breaking glass. Though I suppose we're past propriety now. Sarah had finished marking her donor sites, the purple surgical pen creating a map of sacrifice on her skin. I need to start soon, she said to Dr. Hernandez. Every minute increases the necrosis risk. She looked at Haley. I know it doesn't fix anything, but maybe it's a start. Why? Haley asked. The question she'd wanted to ask for 10 years. You were my best friend. Why did you choose them? Sarah's hands paused in their preparation. Because I was weak. Because I was 17 and scared and thought belonging to something cruel was better than belonging to nothing. Because I watched my parents' restaurant fail and blame each other and decided survival meant choosing the winning side. She resumed preparing, her voice steady despite the tears. I've saved hundreds of lives as an ER nurse, but I've never forgiven myself for the one I helped destroy. So no, this doesn't fix anything. But your wolf needs skin, and I need to bleed for something worthwhile. Sometimes that's all the redemption we get. Dr. Hernandez had been silent through all of this, overwhelmed by the human drama playing out in her veterinary unit. But now she spoke, "If we're doing this, we need to do it now. His temperature is rising. Infection is setting in." She looked at the unlikely collection of people, the dying mayor, the kneeling former Queen Bee, the nurse preparing to flay herself, the woman who'd returned from exile with a wolf as her only family. Everyone out except medical staff and Haley. This is still a hospital, not a theater. But as they prepared for the unprecedented surgery, the news crews outside were turning the hospital into exactly that, a theater where America could watch redemption play out in real time. The anchors had pivoted from disaster coverage to something else, something that made people stop scrolling and actually watch. They'd found Tyler's confession video, leaked by a nurse who thought the world should know. They'd found the old viral video of Haley's humiliation, provided by a classmate who thought context mattered. They'd found yearbook photos and police reports and a dozen other pieces that assembled into a narrative about cruelty and consequences, about choosing to save those who'd tried to destroy you. The country divided immediately, as countries do. Some said Haley should have let them burn. Some said forgiveness was the only thing that separated humans from animals. Some focused on the wolf, amazed that wildness could choose gentleness. Some focused on Madison, debating whether monsters could become mothers worth saving. The conversation spread across platforms and dinner tables. Everyone suddenly an expert on redemption, on justice, on what they would have done in that moment when the ceiling was falling and choices had to be made. But in the veterinary unit, there was no debate. There was only Sarah, gritting her teeth as she cut grafts from her own thighs without adequate anesthesia because time mattered more than pain. There was Dr. Hernandez, performing a procedure no veterinary manual had ever described, grafting human skin onto a wolf while praying to God she wasn't sure she believed in. There was Haley, singing Romanian lullabies while Rook's body fought infections that would have killed him in the wild, that might kill him still. That made every breath a small victory against odds that had never favored either of them. And there was Madison, sitting in the hallway outside, holding Lily, who'd finally fallen asleep, listening to her father's labored breathing, understanding for the first time that love wasn't about power or perfection or performance. It was about choosing to stay when staying hurt, about singing to wolves and cutting your own skin and admitting you'd been wrong so fundamentally that right seemed like a foreign language you'd have to learn from scratch. The surgery took 4 hours, 4 hours of Sarah providing grafts until Dr. Hernandez said enough. She'd given enough. Any more would risk her own life. 4 hours of Haley never moving from Rook's head, her voice growing hoarse but never stopping. Those Romanian words her mother had given her, now given to the wolf who'd chosen her when the world hadn't. 4 hours of Madison waiting in the hallway, fielding calls from lawyers and reporters and refusing them all, choosing for once to be present for something that mattered more than perception. When Dr. Hernandez finally stepped back, exhausted and blood-splattered but cautiously optimistic, she said simply, "Now we wait. The grafts are in place. His body will either accept this impossible thing or reject it. But then," she looked at Haley, at the wolf who shouldn't have survived the trap, at the girl who shouldn't have survived the mountains. "Impossible seems to be your specialty." The infection took hold on the second day. Despite the grafts, despite the antibiotics flooding Rook's system, despite Dr. Hernandez working 18-hour shifts to monitor his condition, the wolf's body began its slow surrender. The burns had been too extensive, the smoke damage too severe, the decade of wilderness survival having already demanded too much from a body held together by will more than biology. The fever reached 104 degrees by Tuesday evening, and Rook stopped responding to Haley's voice for the first time since she'd found him in that trap. Dr. Hernandez made the decision Wednesday morning. The wolf's right hind leg, already compromised from the old trap injury, had developed necrotizing fasciitis. The tissue was dying faster than antibiotics could fight, the infection spreading up toward his torso with the inexorability of sunset. "We have to amputate," she told Haley, who hadn't left the veterinary unit in 60 hours. "It's the leg or his life." "He's already missing toes on that leg," Haley said, her voice hollow from exhaustion and constant singing. "He adapted. He'll adapt again." But even as she spoke, She could see what the veterinarian saw. Rook wasn't adapting anymore. He was enduring. His one good eye had developed the glassy distance of creatures preparing for longer journeys than recovery. When Haley touched his muzzle, he didn't lean into her hand but simply accepted it, as if comfort had become irrelevant to wherever he was going. The amputation was successful. Technically. The leg came off clean at the hip joint. The infection spread halted at the border of healthy tissue. But Rook woke from the anesthesia different, not damaged, but decided. He looked at the place where his leg had been with neither surprise nor distress, just acknowledgement. Then he turned his head to the window where, impossibly, 5 wolves stood in the hospital parking lot. They'd arrived during the surgery, materializing from the mountains like grief given form. Hospital security tried to clear them, called animal control, called the state police. But the wolves simply sat, arranged in a semicircle facing the veterinary unit's window, waiting with the patience of pallbearers. The medical staff pretended not to see them. The reporters filmed from a safe distance, their voices hushed as if in church. Even the town's dogs fell silent, understanding that something older than domestication was happening. Rook hadn't eaten since the fire. Not the venison Haley brought from her cabin's freezer. Not the prescription food Dr. Hernandez offered. Not even the chicken broth Sarah heated and cooled and heated again. He drank water when they brought it to his mouth, but mechanically, a courtesy to those trying to save him rather than any desire to be saved. By Thursday, his weight had dropped 15 pounds. His ribs showed through the patches of fur that hadn't burned away. That's when Lily arrived with her mother. The 5-year-old carried her favorite book, The Wolf Who Loved Too Much, clutched against her chest like armor. Madison had tried to keep her away, but Lily had thrown the kind of tantrum that reminded everyone she was Madison's daughter after all, stubborn in her certainty that the wolf needed her story. "He saved me," Lily said simply, settling cross-legged beside Rook's lowered bed. "Now I read to him." And she opened the book with the reverence of ritual, her small finger following the words she'd memorized before she could actually read. Once upon a time, there was a wolf who loved everything. He loved the moon and the rabbits and the snow and even the hunters who tried to catch him. The other wolves said he was silly. Wolves don't love, they said. Wolves survive. But the wolf who loved too much said, "What's the point of surviving without love?" Rook's ear twitched. The first voluntary movement in hours. His good eye shifted to the child, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or just the strange communion between innocents who hadn't yet learned that love was supposed to have limits. Madison watched from the doorway, holding something wrapped in deerskin. When Lily finished reading the wolf in the story, choosing to save the hunter who'd tried to kill him, dying happy because he'd loved completely, Madison stepped forward. "This was my grandmother's," she said, unfolding the deerskin to reveal a wolf pelt, ancient and carefully preserved. "She was Northern Cheyenne. Before she married my grandfather, before she became respectable, she knew things. She would have understood this." She spoke words in Cheyenne that she'd learned phonetically as a child, never understanding them until now. "Maheo o nakohe e sheva." The wolf goes home. She placed the pelt over Rook gently, the old fur mingling with his burned coat. She used to say wolves were the teachers who showed humans how to be family, that when a wolf died saving others, it didn't really die, it just became the lesson. Tyler arrived that evening in handcuffs, escorted by 2 officers who'd agreed to the visit before his transfer to county jail. He'd confessed to everything: the embezzlement, the arson, the decade of smaller failures that had led to one catastrophic decision. His legs were still bandaged, would always bear scars from the burns. But he walked on his own to Rook's bedside. "I'm sorry," he said to the wolf, as if the animal could grant absolution humans couldn't. "I'm turning myself in, pleading guilty to everything. No deals, no lawyers, no excuses." He looked at Haley. "The insurance money from the reunion hall, if there is any, goes to your camp. The prosecutor says I'll get 5 to 7 years. Maybe when I get out, if you'll let me, I could work there, Learn how to be something better than I've been. Rook lifted his head slightly, fixing Tyler with his one good eye. For a moment, Tyler felt what prey feels, the complete understanding of being seen, measured, and found wanting, but not worthless. Then the wolf lowered his head again. The effort too much, but the message delivered. Even monsters could be reformed, but it required admitting you were one first. Sarah hadn't left except to change her bandages where the grafts had been taken. Her thighs were wrapped in gauze, weeping lymph and blood. But she refused stronger pain medication than ibuprofen. I need to feel it, she'd told Dr. Hernandez. It's the least I can do. She maintained the vigil with Haley, two former friends sitting on opposite sides of a dying wolf, finding in silence the forgiveness words couldn't carry. By Friday night, Rook had stopped drinking water. His breathing had become labored. Each inhale a mountain to climb. Dr. Hernandez suggested euthanasia, gently, professionally, but Haley shook her head. He's never taken the easy way. I won't force it on him now. At midnight, the 5 wolves in the parking lot began to pace. At 1, they sat again, muzzles pointed toward the moon that was rising full over the mountains. At 2, Rook opened his eye and looked directly at Haley, present in a way he hadn't been for days. She understood. She'd understood since the morning, maybe since the fire, maybe since the trap. Love meant knowing when to hold on and when to let go. She lay beside him on the veterinary bed, careful of his amputation site, her face against his neck where the fur still smelled like pine and freedom despite the hospital's antiseptic assault. Mama would have loved you, she whispered in Romanian. She would have understood what you are. Not a wolf, not a pet, but family. The kind you choose, the kind that chooses you back. Rook's tongue, dry and careful, found her tears, the same gesture from their first night together, when they'd been broken creatures deciding whether to die alone or live together. He licked her face with the methodical patience of a mother cleaning her young, removing the salt and sorrow, preparing her for what came next. At 3:30, his breathing changed. Sarah reached across him to take Haley's hand, their first touch in 10 years. Madison and Lily stood in the doorway, Tyler behind them with his guards. Dr. Hernandez stopped pretending to check charts. Even the hospital seemed to hold its breath. Machines beeping elsewhere but silent here, in this room where a wolf was teaching humans how to grieve together. At 3:33, under the full moon that lit the mountains he'd never run through again, Rook exhaled one last time. The silence that followed was complete, the absence of his breathing creating a vacuum that pulled sobs from Haley's throat. Not the keening of fresh grief, but the deeper sound of accepting that love always ends in leaving. The 5 wolves in the parking lot raised their muzzles and howled. Not the Hollywood howl of movies, but the real thing, a sound that climbed octaves and pierced walls, that spoke of loss in frequencies humans felt in their bones rather than heard with their ears. One by one, other wolves answered from the mountains, their voices carrying on the October wind until all of Riverside woke to the sound of mourning. Dogs throughout the town joined in, their domesticated voices remembering wildness. Even humans found themselves at windows, some crying without knowing why, responding to something older than language. The howling continued for exactly 7 minutes, the time it had taken Rook to die, then stopped as suddenly as it began. The 5 wolves stood, looked once more at the window where their pack member lay still, and walked back toward the mountains. They didn't run. They walked with the measured pace of honor guards, disappearing into the darkness that had birthed them, taking with them the proof that love could exist between species, between enemies, between the living and the soon-to-be memories. Mayor Robert Sinclair died 6 hours after Rook, at 9:47 on Saturday morning, October 18th. The timing felt deliberate, as if he'd waited to ensure he wouldn't overshadow the wolf's departure, understanding even in death that some stories weren't his to lead. His last words, whispered to his hospice nurse, were, "Tell them to read it all. Every word." The reading took place the following Tuesday in the Sinclair Mansion's library. a room Madison hadn't entered since childhood. The house felt like a mausoleum, every surface covered in dust except for the desk where Robert had spent his final years writing. 3 boxes of documents sat beside the lawyer, Harold Morrison, who'd driven from Helena with the expression of someone carrying explosives. The gathering was small but significant. Madison and Tyler out on bail pending sentencing, Haley, Sarah, and surprisingly, the entire city council. Harold cleared his throat and began with the will, his voice carefully neutral as he delivered devastation wrapped in legalese. To my daughter, Madison Elaine Sinclair Brooks, I leave the sum of $1 to be held in trust until she completes the following conditions. 1. She must work without pay at the Camp Second Chance, should Miss Parker establish such a place, for no less than 2 years. 2. She must attend weekly therapy with Dr. Jennifer Watts, whom I have already paid for 5 years of sessions. 3. She must make public acknowledgement of her actions toward Haley Parker and genuine efforts toward restitution. Should these conditions be met, she will inherit the family home and remaining assets, estimated at $2 million. Should she refuse or fail to complete these conditions, all assets transfer immediately to Haley Parker for the establishment and maintenance of youth programs for bullied and at-risk children. Madison's face went white, then red, then something beyond color. But Harold was already reading the letter that accompanied the will. Robert's confession formatted like the political speeches he'd given for 20 years. Except honest. I, Robert Allen Sinclair, being of sound mind and failing body, make this confession to be read publicly upon my death. 23 years ago, on February 17, 2001, I drove drunk from the Riverside Country Club where I'd been celebrating a business deal. At approximately 3:15 in the morning, I lost control of my vehicle on Highway 12 and struck a tree. The car's engine caught fire. I was trapped, unconscious, and would have died if not for Emma Parker. Harold paused, letting the name sink in. Everyone knew Emma Parker, the Romanian immigrant who'd cleaned their offices, their schools, their hospitals, the woman they'd passed in hallways without seeing, whose daughter they'd allowed to be tortured. Mrs. Parker was walking home from her night shift cleaning the very country club I'd been drinking at. Despite the danger, despite having every reason to keep walking and let a drunk stranger burn, she broke the window with a rock, dragged me to safety, and stayed with me until the ambulance arrived. She refused the reward I tried to give her. She refused recognition. She asked only that I be better. Basho! I failed that request spectacularly. The letter detailed everything. How Robert had hired a private investigator to follow Emma and Haley, learning about their life in the car. How he'd anonymously paid for Emma's cancer treatments, though she'd died anyway. How he'd watched his own daughter terrorize Haley while secretly funding the girl's survival. The cabin purchased through a shell company. The scholarship to Wildlife Management School. An anonymous donor who was never anonymous. The veterinary bills for Rook over the years, paid before Haley even knew they existed. But here's the truth beneath the truth, Harold read, Robert's words growing more urgent as they approached revelation. I didn't help Haley Parker out of gratitude to her mother. I helped her out of cowardice about my daughter. I saw Madison becoming cruel, entitled, vicious. Everything I'd been before Emma Parker saved me, and instead of confronting my failure as a father, I tried to balance the scales secretly. I let Madison destroy Haley publicly while I supported her privately, as if money could wash blood from my hands. Harold pulled out a second box, filled with surveillance reports, photographs, detailed accounts of Haley's life, years of documentation, Haley studying by candlelight in the car, Haley and Rook learning to hunt together, Haley graduating with honors despite having no family in attendance, Haley being hired by the Forest Service. Every triumph and tragedy cataloged by someone paid to watch but never intervene. This is sick, Madison said, her voice small. She was flipping through photos of Haley at 17, 18, 19, aging from victim to survivor while Madison had aged from predator to predator with better makeup. He watched you. He watched us. He knew everything and did nothing. He did something, Haley corrected quietly. He just did it wrong, like all of you knowing something was wrong but choosing the easier path. She picked up a photo of herself and Rook from 5 years ago, both of them looking at something off camera, probably the sunrise. Your father thought money could fix what cruelty broke. You thought cruelty could fix what insecurity broke. Tyler thought fire could fix what failure broke. Sarah thought distance could fix what cowardice broke. Everyone trying to fix things without admitting they were the ones who broke them. Harold cleared his throat and continued reading. The letter's next section was addressed to the town itself, and by Robert's instruction, would be published in the Riverside Gazette the next day. To the citizens of Riverside, I confess my greatest failure. I knew what was happening to Haley Parker and did nothing to stop it. I knew about the bullying, the viral video, the paint incident, the systematic destruction of a child whose only crime was poverty. I knew because many of you knew and, like me, chose silence over justice. We told ourselves it was teenage drama. Kids being kids, not our business. We told ourselves these comfortable lies because the truth that we were allowing children to torture another child was too uncomfortable to acknowledge. The room had gone silent except for Harold's voice. Even Tyler, facing prison, looked stunned by the scope of confession being unveiled. I kept journals, Harold continued, pulling out leather-bound books filled with Robert's handwriting. Every city council meeting where we discussed the homeless problem instead of acknowledging it was a 17-year-old girl living in a car. Every PTA meeting where parents complained about that Parker girl bringing down property values by existing. Every moment we as a town chose respectability over responsibility. These journals will be donated to the Riverside Historical Society as evidence of our collective failure. Madison had found one of the journals, dated from her senior year. Her father's handwriting was precise, recording her cruelties with the same detail he'd once used for city budgets. April 15th, Madison organized what she calls Trash Day. Students threw garbage at Haley Parker. I watched from my office window. Did nothing. Told myself intervention would make it worse. The truth, I was afraid of my own daughter. She turned pages with shaking hands. September 9th, Haley's mother died today. Madison's response, good, now maybe she'll leave. I've raised a monster and lacked the courage to face it. Increased anonymous donation to $50,000. Money instead of morality. The Sinclair Way. October 1st. The paint incident. Watched the video before Madison deleted it. Haley begged them to stop. They laughed. I transferred $100,000 to a trust for Haley. As if money could wash paint from a dead woman's dress. Emma Parker saved my life. I let her daughter's life be destroyed. There is no redemption for this. Sarah had been silent throughout the reading, but now she spoke. He's right. There's no redemption. But there might be responsibility. She looked at Madison. We can't undo what we did. We can't bring back Rook or give Haley her teenage years or resurrect her mother, but we can choose what happens next. We can choose to be better than we were, even if we can never be good enough to balance the scales. Harold had one more document, this one in an envelope marked for Haley Parker Private. But Haley opened it there, in front of everyone, because secrets had caused enough damage. It was a letter from Emma Parker to Robert Sinclair, dated 1 week before her death. Written in careful English, every word considered. Mr. Mayor, I know you have been helping us. The money that appears, the bills that vanish, the guardian angel who thinks he's invisible. I know it's you. I should be grateful, but I'm not. You help us hide instead of helping us belong. You give money instead of dignity. You watch my daughter suffer and think your checks make it acceptable. They don't. When I die, and it will be soon, Haley will be alone. Not because she has no money, but because she has no community. You could change that. You could stand up, speak out, make it stop, but you won't. Because you're still the same drunk I pulled from that car, just with better publicity. Stop sending money, start sending courage, or better yet, find some of your own. Emma Parker. The silence that followed was complete. Even Harold, who'd thought he'd read everything, looked shaken. Emma Parker had seen through everything, the charity, the cowardice, the complicated machinery of secret kindness that allowed public cruelty to flourish. She knew Haley said wonderingly. My mother knew everything, and she still stayed. Still cleaned your buildings and smiled at your children and lived with dignity despite your indignity. She looked at Madison, at Tyler, at Sarah, at the city council members who'd arrived expecting drama but found judgment. She used to tell me that wolves were noble because they didn't hide their nature. They were what they were, honestly. It's humans who pretend, who perform, who hide behind kindness that isn't kind and help that doesn't help. Madison stood abruptly, journal still clutched in her hands. For a moment, it looked like she might run. Then she walked to the window that overlooked the town her family had controlled for 3 generations, the town that had shaped and misshaped her, the town that would be watching to see what Madison Sinclair Brooks did with her father's impossible will. I'll do it, she said, turning back to face them. All of it? The camp? The therapy? The public acknowledgement? Not for the money Tyler's going to prison and I'll lose the house anyway. Not for reputation that's gone forever. I'll do it because... She paused, searching for words that weren't performance. Because Lily deserves a mother who faces consequences instead of avoiding them. Because Rook died saving her. And I can't let that mean nothing. Because my father was right, I am a monster. But maybe monsters can learn to be human. Isn't that what rehabilitation means? Harold gathered the papers, his part complete. The will was ironclad, the confessions documented, the truth revealed. But as people began to leave, Haley noticed something the lawyer had missed, a small envelope that had fallen behind the boxes. It was addressed simply Rook. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a note in Robert's shaking handwriting. For the wolf who did what I couldn't protect the innocent. I know animals can't cash checks, but I needed to acknowledge that sometimes the real humans aren't human at all. Haley looked at the check, at the absurdity of trying to pay a wolf for being a wolf, and laughed, really laughed, for the first time since the fire. The sound startled everyone, so unexpected in this room full of confession and complication. But the laughter continued, building, until tears streamed down her face, though whether from mirth or grief was impossible to tell. He tried to pay everyone. She gasped between laughs. My mother for saving him, me for surviving Madison, Rook for being loyal, the whole town for looking away. He spent 20 years writing checks to avoid writing apologies, funding everyone's life except his own daughter's because that would have required actually talking to her. Madison laughed too, bitter and broken. That's the Sinclair way. We throw money at problems until they become different problems. We build libraries and fund scholarships and put our names on buildings, thinking legacy can replace love. She looked at the journal in her hands, her father's careful documentation of failure. But you can't pay a wolf to love you. You can't fund your way to forgiveness. You can only choose, every day, to be better than you were, even when better isn't enough. Even when the wolf is dead and the girl you tortured is the only one who can teach you how to be human. The city council members left quickly, already discussing damage control, press releases, the logistics of a scandal too documented to deny. Harold Morrison packed his boxes, glad to be done with this family's bitter legacy. Tyler's guards led him back to jail, where he'd await sentencing for trying to burn away his inadequacy. Sarah drove herself to the hospital for her shift, her grafted thighs still weeping beneath bandages, her penance measured in pain and purpose. But Haley and Madison remained in the library as the sun set, 2 women shaped by the same man's cowardice, reading through journals that documented a decade of watched suffering and subsidized survival, learning how Madison's cruelty had been observed and cataloged, how Haley's resilience had been purchased but not protected, how the whole town had participated in a performance where everyone knew their roles: victim, bully, bystander, and played them perfectly while one man paid for the show from the shadows. We're all he left, Madison said finally. His 2 daughters, one by blood, one by debt, both ruined by his inability to do the right thing when it mattered. No, Haley corrected. We're not ruined. We're revealed. Now we know exactly who we are, who he was, who this town has been. The question is who we choose to be tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days after that until we're dead like him and Rook and my mother. leaving behind nothing but the consequences of our choices. She stood to leave, taking the check made out to Rook, planning to frame it as evidence of the absurdity of human solutions to Wolf's simple problems. At the door, she turned back to Madison, who sat surrounded by her father's confession. "Your grandmother was right," Haley said. "Wolves are teachers. Rook taught me that loyalty isn't about blood or money or even species. It's about choosing to stay when staying hurts. Your father never learned that lesson, but you still could." 6 months later, on a morning when spring fought winter for dominance over Montana, Camp Second Chance opened its gates for the first time. The property sprawled across 200 acres of wilderness that bordered the national forest, purchased with Robert Sinclair's money, but built with hands that had learned the weight of redemption. The main lodge, constructed from recycled timber from the burned Reunion Hall, stood as proof that destruction could become foundation if you were willing to do the work. Madison Sinclair Brooks arrived at 5:30 a.m., as she had every day for 6 months, her BMW traded for a practical truck, her designer clothes replaced with jeans that bore honest dirt. She'd lost 30 pounds and found something harder to measure the beginning of respect for work that built rather than performed. Her hands, once manicured for appearance, now carried calluses from hammering, painting, digging. She prepared the classroom where she'd teach her first anti-bullying workshop, the irony not lost but transformed into purpose. "You're early," Haley said, already in the kitchen preparing breakfast for 50. The first group of children would arrive at 9 kids from across Montana whose schools had identified them as at risk, bullied, or bullying. Each would be paired with an animal that had also survived trauma, the theory being that healing happened best when you weren't alone in your damage. "Couldn't sleep," Madison admitted. "Keep thinking about what to tell them. How do you explain to a 12-year-old that you were the monster in someone else's story, that you're teaching them not to become you?" "With honesty," Haley said simply. "Kids can smell performance. They'll know if you're real or rehearsed." The sound of construction drew them outside where Tyler Brooks, 4 months into his work release program, was finishing the memorial garden with 3 other inmates. He'd pled guilty to everything, received 3 years with possibility of parole in 18 months, and been assigned to the camp as part of a rehabilitation program that the judge called poetic justice. His hands that had once held Haley down now planted roses around a stone monument inscribed with 2 names, Emma Parker, who saved strangers, and Rook, who taught us to choose each other. "Morning," Tyler said, not quite meeting their eyes. He never quite met anyone's eyes anymore, carrying shame like a visible weight. But his work was meticulous, every plant positioned with obsessive care, as if perfect gardening could somehow balance imperfect choices. Sarah Chen emerged from the medical building, her white coat traded for practical scrubs, her engagement ring catching morning light. She'd quit her ER position to become Camp Second Chance's medical director, taking a 70% pay cut to be part of something that healed more than bodies. Her fiancé, James, a pediatric psychologist she'd met at a conference about trauma, would be arriving later to help with the children's intake assessments. "The wolf pups are awake," Sarah announced, which meant Lily was awake. Madison's daughter had become the unofficial camp mascot, spending every allowed moment with Rook's offspring, 5 gray wolves born 3 weeks after his death to a female from his pack. The Wildlife Service had approved their residence at the camp under Haley's supervision, understanding that sometimes regulations needed to bend for stories that mattered. They found Lily in the wolf enclosure, a space larger than most houses, reading her book to the pups as they tumbled over each other and her. At 6 months old, they were already showing distinct personalities. Bold, who charged at everything. Careful, who watched before acting. Gentle, who brought Lily flowers in his mouth. Shadow, who followed Haley everywhere. And Emma, named for the grandmother Lily never met, but somehow channeled in her fierce protectiveness of anything smaller than herself. "They're nervous," Lily announced with the authority of a child who spoke wolf. "They know the new kids are coming. Shadow keeps whining." Indeed, the darkest pup was pressed against the fence, looking toward the road with an anxiety that seemed almost human. The first bus arrived at 9 exactly, carrying 23 children aged 10 to 16, each selected for different reasons but united in their damage. There was Marcus, 12, who hadn't spoken since his brother's suicide. Jennifer, 14, who'd been expelled for breaking her bully's nose. Tommy, 10, who lived in his car like Haley once had. Maria, 15, who cut herself to feel something other than invisible. They stepped off the bus with the wariness of creatures who'd learned that new places meant new ways to hurt. Haley stood at the entrance, no longer the skeletal girl in her mother's dress, but not yet comfortable with crowds. "Welcome to Camp Second Chance," she said, her voice carrying despite its quietness. "Here's the only rule that matters: we choose each other. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. You'll each be paired with an animal that understands what you've survived because they've survived it too. They won't judge your scars. They'll just teach you that scars mean you're still here." Madison took the group first, leading them to the classroom where she'd hung the old viral video of herself destroying Haley on a large screen. The children watched in silence as teenage Madison cut Haley's hair, poured paint, demanded confession of worthlessness. When it ended, Madison turned to face them. No tears, no performance, just truth. "That was me," she said. "The person hurting someone else was me. I'm not here to tell you not to bully because it's wrong. You know it's wrong. I'm here to tell you what happens to the bully. You become someone who can't look in mirrors. You marry people who don't love you because you know you don't deserve love. You have children and realize you don't know how to teach them kindness because you never learned it yourself. You end up 40 pounds lighter and 10 years older in 6 months, building a camp for the person you destroyed because it's the only way to sleep without pills. That's what winning by hurting others actually looks like. It looks like me." The pairing ceremony happened at noon. Each child was introduced to their animal partner. Marcus got silent, a dog who'd been beaten until he stopped barking. Jennifer was paired with Rage, a horse that kicked anyone who came close until it learned touch didn't always mean pain. Tommy met Home, a cat that had lived in a dumpster for 2 years. Maria was given Hope, a rabbit that had been used in laboratory experiments, covered in scars but still gentle. Lily insisted on helping, leading each child to their animal with the seriousness of a priestess performing sacraments. "You have to be patient," she instructed Tommy. "Home doesn't trust indoor spaces, but if you sit very still and let him come to you, he'll purr so loud you'll feel it in your bones." The opening ceremony took place in the Memorial Garden as the sun reached its zenith. Parents, teachers, and social workers gathered to witness what skeptics called impossible bullies and victims working together. Wolves and humans sharing space. A town that had enabled cruelty, trying to enable healing instead. Haley stood at the podium Tyler had built, looking at the assembled crowd that included her former tormentors and current partners. "My mother saved Mayor Sinclair's life," she began. "He spent 20 years trying to pay for that salvation with money. But you can't purchase redemption. You can only choose it, daily, in small acts that accumulate like snow until the landscape is transformed. Rook, the wolf who died saving people who'd hurt me, understood this. He chose to enter that burning building not because he forgave, but because that's what love does. It chooses the harder path because the easier one leads nowhere worth going." She paused, seeing Madison wiping tears she'd finally learned were cleansing rather than weak. Camp Second Chance isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about choosing what happens next. Every child here has been broken by cruelty, their own or others. Every animal here has been damaged by human failures. But together, they might learn what Rook taught me, that the pack you choose is stronger than the pain you've survived. And Sarah's wedding took place 3 weeks later in the same garden, with Haley as maid of honor and Madison organizing everything with the precision she'd once used for destruction. Tyler, on a special furlough, played guitar, a skill he'd learned in prison where time moved differently and music mattered more. Even some of the children attended. Marcus sang his first words in 6 months, "Beautiful Day." The final moment came at sunset. Lily standing with the wolf pups as they grew large enough to require respect rather than just inspire affection. Haley knelt beside her, and together they raised their faces to the sky where the first stars were emerging. The howl that emerged wasn't quite wolf, wasn't quite human, but something between the sound of species learning to speak the same language of loss and loyalty. The wolf pups joined in, their young voices uncertain but willing. Then Madison, laughing at the absurdity and beauty of it. Then Sarah and James. Then Tyler from where he worked in the garden. Then the children, one by one. Finding in that ancient sound something that didn't need words, the recognition that every creature knew what it meant to call for its pack and hope someone answered. Some say forgiveness is weakness, Haley said quietly as the howling faded into evening. But it takes the strongest heart to transform pain into purpose, and the fiercest love to teach wolves and humans how to trust again. This story reminds us that family isn't always bound by blood. Sometimes it's found in the broken creatures who choose to stay when leaving would be easier. Haley and Rook, both scarred by traps set by others, created a bond stronger than any biological tie. They showed us that true gratitude isn't expressed through money or grand gestures, but through daily choices to show up, to stay, to choose each other even when it hurts. Robert Sinclair spent decades trying to purchase absolution for his cowardice, never understanding that gratitude requires action, not transactions. Emma Parker demonstrated real gratitude by saving a stranger without expecting reward. Rook embodied it by entering flames to save those who had tormented his human. And ultimately, Madison learned that family the kind worth having is built through accountability, work, and the humble recognition that we all need saving from ourselves sometimes. The camp became a family of the damaged but not defeated, proving that sometimes the people who understand our scars best are those carrying their own. In choosing each other despite their history, they discovered that redemption isn't a destination but a daily practice of choosing love over comfortable hatred. Have you ever been targeted and humiliated by a group like Haley was, while others watched and did nothing to help?